Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. Tonight, our topic is going to be Change is Following a Russian Victory in Ukraine, Part 3. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And tonight, I'm joined by Dee Piers, D for Peace, the co host of Around the World with Brandy and Dee. I'm also joined by my friend, that is Matt Waldy, who has been away for some time but is now back and armed with all kinds of knowledge about the current international situation. And I think we're going to have a great time talking with him about the current crisis and where we are, and also the likely changes we will see following an anticipated Russian victory in Ukraine, probably sometime this summer. So let us start off. I'm going to give the mic to Matt.
Oh.
And see what he thinks about the situation.
So as far as the topic goes, where we're looking at the end of this war, I think that you're right. I think that the summer it will be an inevitable end. But I just wanted to also bring up that part of the reason why, because a lot of people talk about why it's been taking so long to get Bakhmut and taking so long for the Russians to defeat. The way the war has gone after they first went in to try and get a peace deal, which failed. I personally think the war of attrition, started sometime around May or June last year, and was meant to drag out. I think that if Russia did what we did in Iraq, we would be at World War III right now. I think that was a concerted effort now between looking at Xi and Putin the last few days. I think that there was coordination with the tactics and how long it took. I think they went to a lot of trouble to make sure they didn't totally, wipe out Ukraine in the beginning, or make it look like there was any kind of prejudice in their actions. And they went about trying to do it in a somewhat lawful way, even though I do agree with others that no invasion is ever legal. You're crossing a sovereignty, but you can make a case that there was an existential crisis in Russia that caused them to go forward. But I think that the final solution coming out here will be where they get to the point where the Donbass is free. Then there'll be another reckoning, and it's whether or not the West has decided to create a total hot world war, or if they're going to be willing to back off and allow the land to be taken and new lines to be drawn. That, of course, will leave Ukraine with either one port in Odessa or no ports and their entire all the mining, all the minerals, and all the farmland, some of the richest farmland in the world, really the richest farmland in the world, will be in Russia's control, leaving pretty much a shell in Ukraine, possibly landlocked, that will probably be in turmoil and thrown into Poland and whoever wants to come in, which could also incite a world war, which I think is also a threat, because Moldova and not Moldova, but to the north, they are going to not want Poland to come in and take that land. That's one of the reasons why they're Belarus. That's why they're along the borders there. So I think that the end of the war is actually the end of the nuclear strike threat, but it's not the end of a hot world war. Although if it takes longer than summer, and I think this may be part of their plans, if it goes until close to next year, early next year, the depletion of the arms in NATO could end up being so drastic that they may have no choice but to completely back off, and leadership changes and everything else. And that may be their plan.
Okay, I think you've introduced many good thoughts. Oh, well, I like them anyway.
Well, they're speculation. I don't, it just seems so apparent that the power that they're using is so measured that there is no reason for anything to be standing at this point. I mean, they have used a quarter of their air force. They've started to use a half of their ships and their maritime force, and they've used not even a quarter, 20% of their troops. And
That
so it's one of those things
still,
like you just sit there.
they still have those 300,000 troops. They have yet to commit to the
Yep.
battlefield.
Yeah,
They've
and
been,
those are ones that are committed just for the battle.
yeah, they've been
There's a whole army behind that.
training them for months, and getting them ready. 300,000 troops, and they've not been put into the conflict yet.
Yeah, and that's what we know of, 300,000. We've heard some very patriotic push in Russia that there are maybe several 100,000 more that are in training in different parts of Russia right now. That
Yeah,
this
yeah.
turned into a very
I
patriotic
heard
war.
that too. That
Mhm.
it could be another two, 300, four
Yep,
hundred thousand that they actually have to commit if they want to.
yep. So I heard too. Yeah, because it turned into a patriotic war because of the choice of the United States and who they backed. And so I will say out loud that when in 2014, when they did back a far right, Banderite group to take over, that was a small minority in Ukraine. That was not the majority. That nobody can misrepresent the Ukrainian people as being completely Banderite. However, after 8 years, and a constant drone and in the schools and everything else that has and the hatred towards Russians, the hatred towards any ethnic really outside of Ukraine, has created a larger population that is nationalistic. But
Yes,
you can say that in a lot of countries, and it's just that they're in power; they're not being held back in any respect. And
yes, right. And they're in power with a dictatorship.
with the
All
dictatorship,
the
or yeah,
time,
yeah,
okay, become a dictatorship. All the
yep,
opposition has been shut down,
yep,
and so we know that.
thrown
And
in jail.
back then, we're not at all defending democracy.
No,
That's just a myth,
well,
and that has to be recognized. Okay,
yes,
but to go back to the military situation, uh, I just go back to those 300 or 400 or 500 or 600,000 that have, still to be committed. And I go back to the evidence that the collective West is more and more unable to supply ammunition
hmm,
at
yep,
this point, to the Ukrainian armies, which, as you say, are NATO led, okay, at the present time.
hmm,
But the cannon fodder in them is still Ukrainian, and they're sending them into battle with an inadequate supply of ammunition, okay, and artillery, and they're just at a tremendous disadvantage everywhere they go.
hmm,
They're massing currently, everybody says, for a counterattack,
hmm,
but it's unknown how many troops they really can put in for a counterattack. It's not known what kind of arms they're going to have, but it is known that those 300,000 troops are sitting there and waiting to see what that move is going to look like. Then the
yeah.
Russians
And
will decide how to commit them. It's
when
all
that happens, that's when Russia will move all their troops to where they can actually take advantage of it because they're going to have to move reserves from certain areas that they're now protecting. And once those are opened up, Russia has four fronts that they're sitting on, waiting for whichever one Ukraine tries to use, whichever one they have to weaken enough, especially if around the north and the Kupiansk and starts to become activated, and because there's already two cauldrons, Bakhmut and Adivika, down in near Zaporizhia, past Donetsk city. If they open up one more, that means that they have to pull reserves from everywhere, from Kherson, Zaporizhia, up in along the border with Belarus, which is where they've been taking them, from what we understand right now. And that would be the most dangerous to me. That would be a sign that Russia has no idea. They're just going to take over the entire Ukraine if they use the Belarus front to actually cut off the road from Lviv out, from Poland out into they're really just out to take over the lion's share of Ukraine. I don't think they really want to do that. They might want to take everything up to the Dnipro, because that'll give them that buffer, and that's what we always have to look at, right? They said they've been so open about with their conditions; it's ridiculous, right? They said we need 200 miles, essentially a buffer zone, so that you can't, and so then when we put the HIMARS in, well, that went up to now 300 miles, and then we got the at ACMs and the other ones that can go 500 miles. Well, now you need a 500-mile buffer, and so they just keep, they tell it, that's where we're doing. If you don't put those weapons in there, we don't have to take that, and so I personally don't, I feel like you said, I feel for the right now the cannon fodder that is being dragged out of their homes from the ages of 16 until 60 right now, just
They're
being
being dragged
thrown
out of
into.
their homes, dragged out of their bars, dragged out
Yep,
of their restaurants,
yep,
dragged out of their streets to staff uh, an incompletely trained army,
no,
one
and
not suited to fight.
nope,
That
4 hours.
I mean,
That's what they say is the average lifespan of one of these guys at the front right now.
yeah, they said that a few weeks ago, but we don't
Yeah,
know whether it's less now. It
could
seems
be.
like it might be even worse now. We don't know.
Well, it's the tactics. They don't ever see a Russian. Most of them said, "I never seen a Russian. They get killed from the artillery. They're miles and miles away." And that's why, again, I bring up that this is a controlled demolition. This isn't a shock and awe that the United States, loves to use. They are systematically tearing down the infrastructure and I will be honest, the infrastructure of hate that they have developed in that country. And I don't think there's any other way of ending this. But
Okay. I
when
think
we
you
see
put
that,
that
go
in
ahead.
a very good way, the infrastructure of hate, because that is what has been built up, okay, in
Yep.
Ukraine. And the Russians have recognized that if they're going to live in peace, they have to demolish that.
Yep. Yeah, and they're increasingly having to do that with other countries too, and that's the fear I have right now, as far as my own family or my own life, is that the Belt and Road Initiative is going very well for China right now. So what the United States has decided to do is fund these terrorist groups to go in and kill engineers, Chinese engineers that are just, they're not military. They're there just to do their job, to build roads, to build up mining and infrastructure for the towns, and they're
So
literally just
we
going in
are
and killing people.
so we are funding terrorists
Yeah.
to attack the Belt and Road Initiative as it's getting built, okay, in
Yep.
other nations.
Yep.
Okay,
Three different countries that I know of so far. Two in Africa, and one in Laos.
okay, please name the.
The it's in the Congo, and then there's one that's currently, God, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the thing, but it's in let me look it up. I'll get it for you.
Thank you, Matt.
I think it's Mali. Oh, let's see, the gold. No, it was a gold mine in Africa. There it is. Central African Republic. gunmen killed 9 Chinese at a mine. They were building a road into the mine.
Oh my God.
Part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Let's see. They called them. They, of course, the United States said it was a terrorist group. They don't know anything about it, but other people are saying that they were funded by the United States, Central African Republic,
Were they funded specifically by the
Bangui.
CIA?
They were funded. Well, no, NGOs is usually the funding goes through NGOs in Africa. They don't go directly through the CIA anymore. But of course, that would pretty much make them de facto CIA. But the NGOs, that's how NGOs are used around the world.
Yeah, right now.
Yeah. And that just happened 2 days ago. Just so the one in Laos was several weeks ago. And I know that there's more. Danny Haifong had on a great guest that talked about the Laos incident a couple weeks ago. Danny Haifong has got the left lens.
Yes, I know.
Incredible coverage.
I know it's incredible coverage. I watch him a lot.
Yeah, she's very, very
Brian
good.
Barletic also.
Oh, very Brian. Yeah, he's taught me a heck of a lot. I know that the Duran uses him regularly as their expert as well, but
yes, I know.
I like Brian because he doesn't have any chart. You just go right into his system. He doesn't have any pay windows or anything. He just lays it all out. It's very good, very high quality. Anyway, but that's what. So we're undermining whatever we can, and systematically trying to create the atmosphere environment in our country to support a world war, because we know we don't support it right now in this country on a whole, and certainly not enough for them to actually do what they did like in the early 2000s with Afghanistan.
We're far from supporting it. Okay, at this point,
yeah.
And we really don't have the capability for it either. We would have to build capability over a period of time greatly, and put the country on a war footing. And long before that happens, the current administration is going to be out of power. If they keep going on with this, the likelihood is they're going to lose in 2024. It's hard to see how they can win, but
I just look at it this way: Bolton was in both Trump and. Sorry, go ahead.
We've been in conversation so far, and I'd like to see what Dee thinks about all this.
Sorry, Dee.
Okay, so Dee, the mic is yours.
I was going to say I agree with everything Matt's saying.
Oh, okay.
I think we all kind of listen to the same people, and we're researching the same ways, and Matt explains what I've been really surprised, but really you should expect. I mean, the intelligence, the Chinese people always use intelligence with everything, and the Russians with the intelligence, everything is smart, planned out. It's not this chaotic the way the U.S. is. Mm-hmm. Like the U.S. with the whole bully system and the language we use, and it's so different.
It
people
is
acting smart and intelligent.
And I think it has to do with the zero-sum game that we're taught so early on, where if I'm winning, somebody has to be losing. Right. So we're consistently using that paradigm, and that's how I've been gone for a few months. Those are the things that I'm trying to learn now are more cognitive behavioral. I'm very into cognitive science and those kind of things. I learned about economics from 2013 up and so now I'm moving on in the cognitive science. We're losing connection with what humanity means, and we try and make everything out to be very scientific, and not being a person that really has a God in my life. I don't believe. I mean, there has to be some kind of other way of connection and connecting, and so changing my perspective has shown me that a lot of this is coming from a systemic education that we've had since we were indoctrined into it. So we have a very hard time, and it hurts to actually look at our behavior in any kind of critical way. We just sit there and want to blame, the White House. We want to blame other people, we want to blame other countries. We don't ever want to look inside of ourselves and realize that we're not able to connect anymore. We're lost a lot of meaning in our lives, and so that's the struggle, putting this into context with that is hard. So you sit there and you get upset with. I did get upset with countries like Russia and other things that don't view LGBTQ the way we do, don't view these social issues the way and are very heavily religious still, and still use that rhetoric, right? That Bible type of rhetoric, and that's because they didn't lose that. They didn't go through the systematic changeover from a mostly religious, we got rid of our religious right to a large extent, even though I know we pretend that it still controls a lot of our politicians. That isn't really driving our decisions like it used to. And it isn't that I'm missing it. It's just that we have to find what that brought into our lives and replace it. And we're not replacing it, and we're just using science and science alone. And then we'll get mad at some other buddy who decides that, well, it's, they think that cross-dressing is somehow a sin against whatever, even though it's just a part of humanity.
Right.
They just don't know, they're not exposed to it, right? So they, just like we're not exposed to win-win, they're not exposed to everybody's allowed to be who they are and celebrated.
Comment on that.
Sorry.
We think we're doing science. We think we're following a scientific approach. But the center of science, is really critical rationalism. It's really the ability to open yourself up to criticism and to accept all kinds of perspectives and go beyond your own perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And the people in our country who are claiming to follow science, in fact, are not practicing real science. They're taking what they understand as science as a religion that is not
Yes.
denied, by everyone. So that basically closes down science. It closes down progress in science, because progress in science is about the openness to new things,
Mm-hmm.
and the willingness to criticize the old things and to learn also new things.
Yeah, it creates purity codes. And that's what I noticed that we're doing overall, is that we're creating these, because there's purity codes and there's moral codes, right? Moral codes are laws that dictate, that intent is important. Purity codes don't care about intent; they care about who you are. An example of a purity code, a gross one, is you take a cup of water and you take a sip and you backwash into the water, and then you go and drink it again. It feels icky, right? Well, but that was one mouth. It was one thing. So you're creating a purity code where that's gross. So I'm just trying to give an overall. Well, a moral code, you could be involved. You can find a dead body, and you can go, "Hey, I found this dead body, but it had nothing to do with it." And they say, "Well, you had nothing to do with it." Well, fine. You're innocent. But find out that this person was attached to this person in some way. Then, even if he had nothing to do with death, now there could be guilt involved. We're creating these little purity codes out of everything, instead of looking at everything as the intent. Is the intent of what they're doing meaning to hurt somebody else, or is the intent meaning to uphold some belief or choice that they've made in their life? So we're we're shutting down discussion just by saying things like, "Well, I don't like Jimmy Dore. You were on Jimmy Dore, so I'm not going to listen to you anymore."
Yeah.
I mean, who cares? But we'll shut them down. We'll shut them down instantly for that, and we'll shut them down for going on, Fox or at one point talking, being in Congress. It won't believe them at all anymore.
It's cancel culture.
Yeah, it is, but it's also, there's a little extra anger, and we need to talk to everybody, as you know, and I think that's been growing a lot lately. But
Right. Okay. But to get back to some of the earlier
sorry.
considerations we were talking about, it quite all right. So you said something very interesting before, which was that uh, it could be the case that Russia is going to stop, but depending on what Ukraine does now,
Hmm.
and just implying how they react to the Chinese offer, that's probably going to occur.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh yes, yeah. That's yeah. From what I understand, she is going to talk to Zelensky sometime in the next couple of days.
yes, in the next
That's
couple of days.
yeah.
And when he does, he's going to tender an offer. Probably it's going to
Oh yeah,
come to some degree from the Russians
it has to
as well, right? But it's going to contain the Chinese perspectives of what the world should be like
win-win.
and how nations ought to act, okay, with each other. It's going to be a win-win perspective, yes.
Yep.
Uh, and the Russians are going to be part of that perspective also, of the win-win perspective, because they will have basically agreed to what she is going to say.
Yep.
So, depending on the reaction to that, there's going to be some interaction right after Zelensky and she talk with what happens in Bakhmut, what kinds of orders, okay, are given to the military there.
Hmm.
And then, depending on the impact it has, okay, on the battlefront, the Russians will make certain decisions as to how to commit their troops.
Hmm.
They'll probably do so in such a way that there will be enough troops left in order to guard against a possible Polish intervention,
Yep.
okay, or NATO intervention, okay, in general, because the
Mm.
West is probably looking for a situation where the Russians will overcommit and will open up the possibility of an intervention from outside Ukraine, okay, from the West. I'm sure that NATO will be looking for that. I'm not sure they're going to get any openings because I think the Russians are very deliberate in their planning and will be cutting off any reasonable possibility, okay, of that. Okay, and so if that were to happen, if things go in that way, we're probably going to have a resumption of the grinding offense, but even more intense and totally focused on the total destruction of the military capability, okay, of Ukraine over the next 2 or 3 months are aiming to do. Now, an obvious question is uh, will the arrival of Challenger tanks with the so-called but nuclear ammo, I don't think it's really nuclear ammo, but with the arrival of that ammo, will that have any material effect on the course of the war?
I I don't know if D has any opinion on that. I do, but I just don't. I think that it's so whatever the Chinese have, like I think may actually they have something that they want to offer Zelensky, or they wouldn't talk to him, right? And it would be beyond the 12 points that they've already delivered, right? They have already shown that not only have they delivered to Saudi and Iran things that the West never thought they would do, but on top of that, it looks like Syria and Saudi Arabia are now getting together, and there is a summit supposedly planned in late April in China, where I think it's 12 or of the main Middle East states are all coming. So the grand Middle East peace is within reach, and it's because of China. We tried and tried and tried. Supposedly, I don't think we really tried that hard because I think it was really to our advantage that they fought each other. But The first thing out of the gate that China does when they've taken hold of their economic power, which they have, is to bring peace to the Middle East. Awesome. I don't see why they couldn't have something in their back pocket that Zelensky would want. Whether or not Zelensky is their target, that I think may be. I I'm not so sure. Like I'm not so sure that it's Zelensky as their target. They may be talking to Zelensky, but they may be giving some background to somebody, or somebody, and give NATO a win. Somehow figure out how to give NATO a win in the region, not disrupting what's going on with Russia. I think that's how the Ukraine war can finally end. And I think that may have to be, I mean, okay, so spitballing, if Russia went in and took Odessa and then said, well, we'll give it back to Ukraine, that might be enough. So you understand what I'm saying? I'm trying to think of ways. Maybe they go in and take Kharkiv, and they say, well, okay, well, we'll give you back Kharkiv. There has to be some kind of supposed win, because you look at all the crowing they made in August and September when they went in and took land that Russia kind of left for them to take, right? And they thought, oh, this is it. This is how we show we're winning. That could be enough of a show, for them to be able to back off. I don't think that Blinken would think that way. I think that the other side of Biden's world might be willing to do that, because there's a neocon fashion factor right here that doesn't really like what's going on. It is not because that's how Cy Hirsch got his information, was from the alternative side of this, where they need to pump the brakes. They know they're going too far, and this is yeah, and so there's definitely a problem here. I don't personally think that Trump has anything to do with that side. I don't think that it's necessarily political. I think it's more of higher than that. I know it sounds weird, but more of a world oligarch level, where they're coming to terms with the fact that the New World Order is not going to work out, and if they keep pushing it, it's actually going to take away what what little they have left at this point. So I think that Ukraine, they need to give NATO a win. If outside of that, because we were talked earlier, getting Zelensky safety and out, I don't think he can actually make a peace deal, is what I'm saying. I don't think he's capable or authorized to make a peace deal. I think he's authorized to run away in exile and save his skin, which would be enough. I think would be a sad, not sad. What should I say? Telling part of this, and I don't think it's something China wants to reveal, because I think that stops NATO's direct involvement in Ukraine, or U.S. direct involvement in Ukraine, starting a world war. In some respects, I think keeping Zelensky in power has kept the world from falling into a world war, because there's a figurehead to blame that isn't either Russia or the United States. And I think if you remove that faction and show him as just the puppet, it would ruin the entire scenario that the West has built up, with Ukraine being autonomous and have agency. And this is because a lot of that has fallen. But if that fell completely, I mean, there would be turning, right? I mean, I honestly think that the world would, especially in Europe, but even here in the United States, those peace rallies would be huge, because then there would be no way of convincing myself or anybody else convince themselves that there was any good supporting Ukraine. All of it, I think, would fall in. I even think that the stations, the MSM, would start to see that they would need to get their viewers back, and because that's what I think is the only way you can get through MSM is by removing enough of their viewers that it starts to hurt their bottom line, and then you get to the point where the only way to get them back is by covering somebody like Bernie.
Yes,
that's the only reason I think they got Bernie covered at all, was because they realized they wanted to get some of those people the viewers back. But I could be, that's just my opinion. I don't think that I hope China has some kind of something up their sleeve. But
Okay, suppose
I
there's a Chinese offer that Zelensky can't refuse.
oh, that's what I mean. I just don't know if there is anything he can say yes to. The most he could say yes to is say yes, I really do want this, but at the second he did that, somebody else would be in power. Is what I'm saying. That they would instantly put somebody else in power.
The West wouldn't.
Well, the West would try and fake it like it was the next person in line. Zelensky's gone. I don't know what happened. He went crazy, and they cooed him out. But they would have to coup him out before Zelensky said anything. I mean, think about that. What would happen if he came out before being cooed again and said, "Yes, I'm taking the deal with China," broadcast it everywhere. I'm taking this deal with Russia. We're ending this now. They're going to take the Donbass and the areas that have already had the referendums, and we're calling it. And Russia said, "Great, let's do that." If that was out and already in public, what are they going to do to him? They can't coup him. I mean, I guess they could, but then how could the United States back or NATO back the next person? I mean, it would be a huge. I mean, I'm just doing it in my head.
Yes, no, I know you're doing it in my head. In my head too, and I think that there's nothing too shameful for the West to try to do. Okay, in this instance, so they might well, simply do a GM on him.
Yeah.
They
did it in Vietnam, didn't they? They did this very thing in Vietnam, didn't they? They got rid of the president of Vietnam and replaced him real quick after the president was talking about peace with the North.
Right. Okay, but we did it then when we were the dominant power in the world.
That's true.
Times have changed. And we are not any longer. We still might make a desperate play. In other words, you have the feeling. I shouldn't say you, but
No, I know. That's okay.
In general, people must have the feeling by now that there is desperation in the collective West's actions here, because we were surprised, I think, by the Russian capability. Okay, our intelligence wasn't enough to see the real raw capability the Russians had. We were blinded by GDP statistics. We did
gas station country.
That GDP measures a lot of nonsense,
completely,
well as some real stuff, and that everything the Russians had was real stuff. It was not nonsense. And we didn't understand when it comes to real stuff, the Russians had perhaps more than we had. And now that most of the ammunition is gone and everything is stretched thin, and our military sees that it's years before they're going to be able to recover and mount another major effort. Okay, in Europe, maybe people will start thinking a little differently. They certainly have to start thinking about the inherent power that Russia has compared to ourselves.
Oh, the production power alone should scare the United States out of any of these actions. And add in China, and China did not make any announcements with military aid, nor would I expect them to. That would be stupid, right? But they have to be. The announcements they made today were as if we decided to go into Mexico and Canada and say, "Hey, let's join our banking. By the way, your money is the same as my money." That's essentially what they did today. And it's, oh, by the way, we're going to add in everybody else in this, global South, including Saudi Arabia, and Mexico, and just say, hey, your money is our money. Let's just trade amongst ourselves. And that there's no way we would ever trust anybody to that extent, because right now anything bad that happens to Russia is catastrophic to China and vice versa. And the same in Iran, and soon, slowly, the same in India, and and all these countries that are building up in BRICS. South Africa, we don't hear about it in the news at all. South Africa is in uproar right now. The leftist leader down there is taking a very popular uprising and turning it into trying to turn it into a Marxist country. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as saying it's communist, but definitely socialist. And they look like they're going to win. And Peru, same thing. They pushed it too far with this stuff. Will Lula do the same thing? A lot of people are saying that he's hedging his bets quite a bit, but I think he'll change his tune after he comes back from the trip with Xi, which is scheduled for next week.
Yes, I tend to think he's going to change his tune there also.
Yeah, he's kind of like Erdogan in Turkey, where he hedges his bet quite a bit. He plays both sides of the fence.
He's cautious and he's careful.
Yeah.
When it comes to the international sphere, and he won't stop hedging his bets.
No. Neither will Erdogan.
Right.
Oh.
Right. Okay, and the Chinese and the Russians are going to allow them to continue to hedge their bets.
Yep, they are. They're not going to complain about it at all.
And they're just
like, yeah, of course,
friendly because they know if they play the long game, they're going to win.
Yep. Yeah, all the trade routes are going to be owned by China. That's what
there's a sense of respect too. When they communicate, they don't talk down to people or belittle people. They speak on an equal scale and respectfully. And that makes a big difference.
It does, and they use such great words when they talk about it, with the kingdom of heaven, and they evoke a very human, side, a very, very soulful side of things. And I've only recently been able to say that word again. That connection between people, and I may be a little bit too jaded now, because they've just she's been so impressive. And the changes that they've made, even the Uyghur crisis, the changes that they made in that region, everybody complains about it, but the second they found out about it, the whole system changed there. It was like 1 week they found out that this systematic, horrible treatment of these people were happening, and it was like the next week, all the leadership were wiped out, and all Uyghurs were put into power. I mean, it was drastic. It was instant.
Yes. And they respect people, and what they do too is they spend so much time lifting the country out of poverty. They wanted nobody in poverty. Everybody had homes, food, work.
300 million a year they pull out of poverty.
Yeah.
There's no way, that's almost the entire population of the United States every year comes out of poverty. Yet it's actually I saw some statistic that it's actually harder to to move up in a class in the United States than it is to get get hit by lightning twice or something like that. I mean, it was ridiculously hard because you go up and down. I mean, anybody that's been poor, I've been poor. You go, you eat your way out, and then you're back in it, and you're living paycheck to paycheck, and then one paycheck down, and it doesn't drop you one paycheck behind; it drops you 10 years behind, and you're all of a sudden in debt up to your, and living in your car. It happened to me. It happens to everybody, real quick, and there's no reason for it. And the China has definitely they're putting their actions where their mouth is, right? And I am wishful or hopeful, but that's my hope, is that they are what they look like they are. And every time I do research on them, it just seems like they are what they say they are. I mean, there's still problems. I'm not saying that it's 1.5 billion people.
You listen to the English version of their news, or you read their news.
Oh yeah, CGN. Yes, CGN's awesome. And I'm sorry, talk about, but I love Xinjiang because they take you into the backwoods and they show you awesome. Anyway, and they do archaeology expeditions that they've been doing, discovering new things. It's what news should be.
Yeah, we've been extremely impressed with all their accomplishments, okay, as well. And we're also very skeptical about the propaganda coming from the West about what kind of system they have. I think we've shown we don't understand their system at all.
And they jail bankers too, which is great.
Real
Yes, they
results.
do.
Sorry, say that again, D.
They jail bankers,
Yes,
Yes, they do.
and that's a very good sign.
It is. Well, and notice that nobody here has been talking about, a lot of the right wing groups will talk about, Ukraine's problems with, their economy, when we know that their debt is being supplied by our sovereign. We're not, taxpayers aren't actually paying through the nose for any of this stuff, and we could prop them up for as long as we wanted to economically. That's not the issue. The second that we stop, though, yes, there will be a massive crash, but not because of their debt, but because of the they're incapable of getting resources into their country. They don't have a trade relation in order to bring those things into it in a decent price, that they're going to go through the roof, just like they did in Weimar, just like they did in Zimbabwe. It's always a resource restriction. So I like that, but China doesn't have that because they are a planned economy. And we constantly insist on this supposed free market invisible hand, right? And it bugs the crap out of me because people say that we're still planned. It says, well, but the corporations plan it, not our government. There's a difference there. It's still planned, but it's not planned for anything but profit. And I know I'm getting off track. I just wanted to bring it back to the Ukraine at this point. So when somebody says they're going to run out, their economy's in shambles, how is Russia going to keep up with all these? Well, they nationalized their military industrial complex. They nationalized their oil and energy. So now they have two things that they can produce as much as they want to, because they can produce as many rubles as they want.
Sure.
And so it ends up, we look at it and gasp with all the weapons that they're able to pound down and all the weapons they're producing compared to what we're doing. Well, the difference is that we have to make a profit doing it. They don't.
Yeah, there's that, but there's also the other thing. We haven't really been focusing on actually producing that much. We've been focusing on dealing with the military industrial complex and essentially negotiating deals with them that are favorable to the military industrial complex. There's no cutting of any fat out of that system, because the MIC insists on the fat.
Mm-hmm.
They insist on the profit. They're not really operating in the national interest. Okay, in Russia, they've wiped that out, okay, by nationalizing it.
Yep. Well, you know what else they did? Because they are using Ukraine as a testing ground for their weapons, Russia and China soon, but Russia for sure. And they've noticed how well they've done against United States made weapons and European made weapons, that they're now countries that are no longer seeking arms deals with the United States because the product isn't good enough.
I know, that's amazing. That's amazing. And it's amazing they've proved that. It's amazing that that's a lesson that we've learned. Well, I don't know if we've learned it.
No, yeah.
But the world has learned it.
Well, I just heard today that they did something similar right before World War II in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, where Russia, Soviet Union at the time, and Germany poured weapons into Spain to try and hit it. Yeah, they tested out their weapons. Yeah, it's the same difference.
Weapons. Okay. Mm-hmm. Germany, of course, found that their weapons were very, very good.
Yeah.
And Russia went
back to the drawing board.
Were not So
Yep.
Russia started learning very, very fast
Hmm.
and producing new weapons.
Yep.
And
Yep.
of course, now we're in the position that Russia was in back then.
Hmm.
Question is,
Yeah.
are we going to learn those lessons? And
We
are we
can't.
going to reform the military industrial complex, or is the
That's the problem.
we're not there to do that?
Yep. Yeah, the production capacity and the resource chain, every is not here anymore.
Yes.
We've
So ironically, for our own defense, we have to dump the corruption
Mhm.
and change the Congress, okay, entirely, and get people in who are willing to do what must be done in order to keep us as a co-equal of the other powers in a multipolar world.
and maybe that's what the oligarchy may come to the conclusion. I mean, that's kind of what happened at the Depression, right? Where the oligarchy came together and realized we were going to have uprisings, and that the only way, because FDR ran on balanced budgets, he did not he didn't run on much of a radical platform when he got elected in 1932.
But
That changed when he got into office.
changed as soon as he got into office.
And that's why I'm wondering if this is the same situation where because the oligarchs at that time were old money, and pretty much he was part of that group. I mean that's the he knew that he had to do something because the United States was falling. The depression had hit, it had gotten so deep, and people were done. And there was definitely uprising occur, and they had to do something. And what did they do? I'm wondering if that might not happen in 2024 when they realize that we
I
have
don't
to restore
know, but
production.
if we look back into 1933, 1934,
Hmm.
the oligarchs weren't learning any lessons then. They were trying to coup FDR.
Well, one side. There was a side that was quite interested in help the oil barons, the not Carnegie, the other guy, but it was backing FDR and pushing pretty heavily for the new deal after he heard about it and was sold on it. But
Uh,
I agree with you.
the
I
guy,
agree with you.
who's the other guy? You mean Henry Ford?
And Ford, yeah,
Yeah, Henry Ford. Yeah, Henry
yeah,
Ford had
yeah.
some, with all his faults, he had a little common sense.
Well, yeah, he did, but he knew that he had to have a country in order to turn into, a United States Nazi, which was his main goal.
He had to have a country that was prosperous enough to buy his cars.
Yep. Yeah. 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 His fascism wouldn't have a home.
Yes.
But anyway, that's the only thing that makes me think that maybe there might be an uptick, because the only reason why we got rid of our production was because it was too profitable. Not because we can't actually do that again, and not do it in a way that actually makes sense, not be ditch digging jobs or horrible conditions. But that's the problem,
Now,
is leaving that up to them.
just in terms of the population advantage of the United States,
Yeah.
of course, if we could mobilize the way we did in World War II, we would be able to do better than the Russians are doing now in producing ammunition, okay, and war material, okay, of various kinds. But
Yeah.
we are nowhere near to mobilization. Everybody's fooling around with marketing and
Yep.
TV programs and
Financialization of our economy is
financial
too
of our
it's it,
economy.
it's too much heroin for an oligarch to take.
It has weakened us very severely.
Yeah, and the thing is now with China being completely Russia and China, that we cannot beat that production. There's no amount. World War II would have, if China's billion people were involved in World War II, we would not have been able to. Uh, I don't think match their production. We would have had to have had some kind of strategic. And if you look back, I mean, I've done a little history. We had a really large learning curve in our in our tactics and our strategery, bad word, but in World War II, before we figured out what we should what would work. And
Oh,
that
yeah,
would be the only difference.
it did take us some time. I wanted to take a quick look at some of the comments before we end. Uh, Robert Copeland asks, what kinds of arms do the Russian army have now? That's a big topic. I think we ought to leave it for a future program. But they have all kinds of arms, different sorts of arms than we have, okay, in
Hmm.
many ways, and superior, okay, in many ways to our arms. Just to mention one particular area, they have hypersonic missiles. We don't have them operational yet.
Yep.
And that
Yep.
gives them a nuclear war advantage. They also have more warheads, okay, than we have. Uh, we cannot take them on directly in a war.
Mm.
It would be
They,
extremely foolhardy to do that.
they also have an entire tank class that we don't have. They also have a larger ammunition production capability, where we could produce 25,000 or whatever of these high end millimeter, a month, and they actually can do that in less than a day.
Yes.
It's, so
So
we're
it's
just not out.
a huge production advantage. We are not sufficiently well armed to directly contend with them. NATO is not sufficiently well armed to directly contend with them. That's one of the lessons we're finding out from this particular war. I mean,
We do have a navy. Our navy is quite superior to everybody else's in the world. That is the one thing the United States has a huge advantage on.
right, but a war in Europe will not be fought by navies,
No,
unfortunately for us. And a
no,
war in China will not be fought actually
no.
by navies.
And,
Okay,
and
and
stop it with the Taiwan.
A war over Taiwan will not even be fought by navies, because if our
No,
navy gets anywhere near the war in Taiwan, Chinese missiles are going to take care of that navy, the aircraft carriers, and anything we have. We don't
I
have the military capability to contend with those powers, okay, in Eurasia. Not
no. And it is absolute bullshit that the people say that Taiwan wants to not be unified with China. They want status quo overwhelmingly, to the point where they're now ousting all the leaders that we're talking about back separate, being separate from mainland. So they
yeah,
wouldn't be supportive.
political change going on in Taiwan, such that the Kuomintang party
Yeah.
is taking over again, and the Kuomintang are very much for unification with China.
Yes, and that's also, I sorry to me to talk over. That's also nice because Japan is the backer of that party, and so that makes you realize that there are a large faction in Japan that isn't in the hip pocket of the United States and does not like the war talk in with China. I know that the prime minister is very neoliberal, but they still have not changed their economic system towards neoliberalism to the point, any kind of significant salient point where they're still running at low interest rates, and still an absolute proof that MMT is description is correct.
Right? But also, just to make this point, Japanese have huge trade with China,
Yep.
and they want to see that trade continue, that business can continue. And uh, we cannot offer comparable trade to China, of course, because China has 1.5 billion people. And
Yep. And
that's really the bottom line here.
Japan is Turkey in to Europe, Russia to Turkey. Japan is China to us. When China decides finally to say they're done messing around with us and stopping trade, we will get all our trade goods from China through Japan, and they will become super wealthy.
Right. And so Steve Wolfbrand points out China's never been imperialistic. Well, that's actually true.
Yeah.
They've been very self centered on their own culture. And when they had a choice about it, they didn't want to deal with the outside at all, because they
Mm-mm.
considered everybody else inferior to themselves. And Steve says Fauci lied. Steve says, Doc, the war was supposed to be over in 2 weeks. It's been over a year now. I know. Brandy says, they said Britain gave depleted uranium shells to Ukraine. Yes, I know.
Yes, they did.
Heidi. And Steve says, I made a bundle investing in bricks. Well, that was a very wise investment, Steve. And I'm
Yep.
sure you'll make more and more and more if you continue to invest in bricks.
Yep.
Uh, And 953, Steve says China is making huge headway in space travel as well, which I follow constantly. And Robert Copeland says, when the war in Ukraine is over, who is going to pay to rebuild Ukraine? Well, I don't know who's going to pay, but I know that there's no shortage of money on this side if we somehow feel compelled to rebuild. But what the Russians are concerned about is whether the rebuilding of Ukraine will be something the West actually does to rebuild the military threat to Russia from Ukraine. So the likelihood is that Russia, as it wins, is going to take steps to stop that. And that's going to involve the Russians paying to rebuild the economy of Ukraine. And I think they're going to
Which
do
will
it.
be good. Which would be
Yeah,
good for Russia.
good for Russia, and it'll be good for Ukraine,
Yeah.
and it's going to be good for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Yes, and
Well,
just today, Putin said that if wheat was ever a problem for any African nation to buy, they would give it to him for free. And one of the reasons is because of the land that they've taken in Ukraine that is now part of Russia. And that's the key point. Everybody talks about them taking land. Well, referendums, we can argue about whether they were, forced or whatever, but they are taking them as states. So they're not occupying them. They are a part of Russia. That is a wholly different setup than us, like in Syria, where we've taken 30% of their land and are just raping all their wheat and oil and taking it for our profit.
and
So,
you have to remember also that when they've taken these areas that are predominantly Russian in population and in culture, so
yep,
that means that the people in these areas are disposed to be Russian
yep.
and to want to be inside of Russia. And whether the plebiscites were completely honest, or not, if the Russians undertake to rebuild these areas, there's bound to be a great deal of appreciation on the part of the local Russian population. So it's not going to be hard to assimilate them into Russia.
Mariupol's already returning. They've shown some incredible buildings that they're rebuilding there, and people are returning.
Okay, kind of think of it, in this way. There was a time when we annexed Texas to the United States.
Yeah.
And we did that in part because most of the population of Texas, was Americans.
Hmm.
Uh, we didn't have any trouble integrating Texas into the United States.
What and the reason why Mexico was willing to get rid of it at the end was not just because of the Mexican American War, but because the Comanches in the area were giving them such a hard time that they were sick and tired of the incursions into their their trade routes by the Comanches, who decided to pretty much just raid all the Spanish trade that was coming into anyway. So there's all these different layers of reasons why these things hurt, but we need to be aware that wasn't our land. We had the Louisiana Purchase that went up through Oregon and Washington. It did not include California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Texas. I mean, we took all that land.
Yes, we did. Brandy Weaver says that Russia will rebuild Western Ukraine, and China may be kind enough to help out Eastern Ukraine. Well, I don't know. I think the Russians are going to rebuild Eastern Ukraine, and it will be part of the common economic effort of the Russians and the Chinese. In other words, the Chinese will trade and trade on favorable terms with the Russians, so the Russians can do what they have to do in the eastern part, okay, of Ukraine. Whether Russia will build Western Ukraine or not depends upon how the peace is constructed and whether the western part of Ukraine becomes a part of Russia too. And there's every possibility the Russians are going to say, well, we don't want this part of Ukraine. They don't want to be part of Russia. So we're not going to take them on. And the Poles want them, so give them to the Poles.
Yep.
Let the Poles have the Nazis.
Yeah. Personally, I think that that's not going to happen. I personally think that the Dnieper is actually going to be the line of demarcation, and that it's really up in the air whether Odessa becomes Russian or not, because it was very Russian. So I have a feeling that Odessa and Transnistria will end up being permanently Russian, but that Kiev will not be touched.
Yeah,
but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I believe that too. I think Kharkov is going to be Russian.
Yes, I think Dnipropetrovsk, just north of Zaporizhzhia, I think that'll be Russian as well, and then everything after that will be. But that's my opinion. And the reason why China can make those sweet deals is because they are a planned economy. They don't need to make a profit. So every time you hear the Economist's newspaper come out with that they're bankrupt, the banks are going bankrupt, all their land is being taken, what are they going to do? Just laugh it off, because all they do is produce what they need to produce to survive. They don't need to make a profit. We do.
Yes, until we change our system. Anyway, we do.
Yeah.
And Brandy says, I tried to explain to my aunt Taiwan is part of China.
Oh,
it's really bad off with cancer.
Legally bad. It's legally part of China. It's not even, the UN says it's part of China. The State Department says it's part of China.
Right, and international law says that it's part of China.
Yeah.
Steve Wolfbrand says the Russian-Ukrainian relationship is complicated and has been for 1,000 years. Yes, it has been for 1,000 years, because the first of the Russian states was founded in Kiev.
Kiev.
So it is.
And Ukraine means borderland. That's what it means.
Yes. And Poland as well, since the Vikings sailed into Byzantium. Yes, they did. Brenny Weaver says, my husband's grandfather was a Polish immigrant. Okay, and my father was the son of someone who migrated here from the Pale of Settlements just outside, of Warsaw, the Shestakova, a Catholic shrine city.
Wow.
Brandy Weaver says, you may be right, Joe. And Brandy says, sometimes I get my East and West mixed up because of my ADHD. Don't worry, Brandy. Lots and lots of people have ADHD. It's extremely common. Okay, I guess we are done for tonight. Thank you all for coming. I'd love to continue this discussion next week, Matt. Okay, are you game?
Yeah, I'm game. That was fun. Thank you.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. It was just so nice to hear you again, Matt.
Oh, thanks, T. I appreciate it. I'm sorry if I talked over you.
No, that's
get
fine.
excited.
That's fine. We're all friends.
You were talking fine tonight, Matt. Really great.
Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, and it was good talking to you guys too. See you guys next week.
Okay, next week it will be on Tuesday, because this particular series on changes following a likely Russian victory.
Mm-hmm.
I have these on Tuesday. Okay, I have other discussions on Thursday, and then on Wednesday and Friday I do the fundraising discussions to try to give the litmus test to all kinds of people in Congress.
Sounds good. That's awesome. Man, you are so busy.
So Andy says, I will join next time.
Oh, sounds awesome. I would love to talk.
Andy. That would be great. Steve Princess, how many Polacks does it take to screw in a light bulb? Please don't tell any Polish jokes. Okay, just remember, Copernicus was Polish.
Yeah.
Right? Chopin, Okay, it was Polish. Okay, I guess that does it for tonight.
Cool.
Okay, so I'm going to say good night. Okay, on that note.
Good night, everybody. Thanks a lot for having me.
Please, somebody buy Joe a coffee.
Oh, and go to my Patreon account and share, share, and subscribe. I always forget to say those magic words.
Yes.
Please do.
Yes. Okay, bye.
Take care.
Good night.